On this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, we speak with Metaswitch on the challenges and opportunities it's seeing for vendors and telecommunication operators from the use of NFV and SDN infrastructure. All right, well, thanks for joining this week's NFV SDN Reality Check. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, Editor-in-Chief here at RCR Wireless News. And this week we're joined by Martin Taylor, who's the CTO at Metaswitch, to talk a bit about the company and the NFV SDN cloud space. So hey, Martin, thanks for joining us this week. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
Very good. Let me start off with, for those who don't know much about Metaswitch, maybe you want to give a little background overview on the company, kind of, on the company's founding and kind of how you guys interact with the telecom space.
Sure, okay. So we're about 700 people. We're about $150 million revenues, just to give you a sense of our size and scale. We're actually based in the UK, although most of our customers happen to be in the US of A. We're not a startup by any means. We've been around for quite a long time. We've been around 30 odd years. The first half of that life was focused very much on OEMs. We wrote software for equipment manufacturers in the networking business. I'm talking about protocol stacks and control plane software, that kind of stuff. And then we kind of evolved into more of a kind of systems company. So starting about 15 years ago, we started to build software systems for network operators, telcos, carriers, cable operators, and so on. And that was with a focus on real-time communications. So that's probably what we're best known for now. Products like telephony application servers, hosted unified communications, session border controllers, IMS cores, media gateways, those kinds of things. That's now generating the majority of our revenues. But one of the things that sets us apart really from other vendors in the networking equipment space, which is kind of how you think of that segment, is that we are and always have been a software company. So even when we were shipping equipment into telcos, it was software that happened to be packaged on standard hardware, and that hardware was off-the-shelf x86-based systems. So we've always sort of stayed true, if you like, to our software roots and our software focus.
Very good. Because obviously, so you guys have quite a bit of history in the telecom world, and I've obviously seen a lot of the evolution of software in the space. It does seem like over the past 5 to 10 years, even there's been such an increased focus on using more and more software by operators. Obviously, like you said, software has always been part of the package, but it seems like more and more now, software is becoming more of the focus as opposed to it being the hardware of the past nowadays. So I'm guessing you guys have seen quite the evolution.
Yeah. I mean, I think traditional equipment manufacturers tend to think of software as just something that you need to stuff inside the hardware to make it useful, right? We've always thought of software as the thing that really does the heavy lifting, and generic hardware as being the engine that enables it to do that heavy lifting. And of course, when the whole industry started to become a lot more software centric, going back 3 or 4 years with the emergence of network functions virtualization as a thing, we were absolutely delighted because that clearly played to our strengths and our way of thinking about the world.
Interesting. Yeah, so the market finally came to you guys. You guys have been sitting there plugging along for years and years, and finally they realized, hey, there's Metaswitch right there waiting for us.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I guess viewing kind of how that evolution has gone about, and obviously, like you said, NFV over the past few years has become a big topic, and just virtualization in general. A lot of operators are moving more and more towards that space. I guess what's been your view on that pace of development and deployment of those technologies by the vendor community, but also by operators in kind of absorbing and embracing those kind of technologies?
Sure. So. This is a huge transformation and a really tough and challenging one. I mean, network operators have been hugely dependent on their equipment vendors historically. They've evolved into organizations that are really good at procuring boxes from which networks can be built, and specifying what those boxes need to do and so on. And moving to a software mindset, and a mindset where they're potentially assembling different components, the NFV infrastructure, the orchestration, the hardware, the software platform, and then of course, virtualized network functions, and plumbing all that together in order to deliver a complete service is something that's really quite different from what they've done in the past. So, this is a tough thing to get your mind around, and not surprisingly, it's taking a while, and longer than we probably thought it would. But realistically, this is it's a 10-year transformation that we're in the middle of right now. Because we were very early in this space, and we coming from a very software-centric background, having written virtualized network functions, with a sort of cloud-native style approach, dating back four years now. Mm-hmm. We've very much been at the sort of sharp edge, if you like, of this whole NFV transformation, and that has meant that we've been working primarily with network operators who are, moving very quickly in this space and really want to select the sort of best of breed virtualized network functions. So our perspective is probably a little bit skewed by the experience that we have of working with operators like AT&T, who are right at the kind of leading edge of this thing. And we see progress that is it's happening across a broad broad front. A lot of organizational changes going on, a lot of people having to sort of reorient themselves, but progress is very steadily being made. And those guys are doing a fantastic job of hitting their targets around what proportion of the network is going to be virtualized, and we're very, very much in the thick of that. Now, of course, we've got lots of customers who are at the other end of the spectrum. Yeah. We have many smaller network operators, many tier 2s and 3s, for whom virtualization is, next time we buy a new thing for our network, maybe we'll buy it virtualized and maybe we won't. They don't feel the kind of same strategic imperative to go that way. And they can make much more tactical decisions, and that's fine. And we're not forcing the pace with any of those guys. It wouldn't make sense to push them into virtualization when it doesn't make sense for their business. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess how important or how different is it for you guys to have this initiative, which is really being driven, it seems to an extent, by the operators, as opposed to past operations have always been somewhat vendor driven. Like you said, you work a lot with the vendor community. They were needing certain software boxes for their for their platforms. It does seem like this virtualization move, at least the latest one here, is really being driven somewhat by operators. I mean, it seems like, 100% by operators. Absolutely. I mean, that original white paper that launched NFV was written by a whole bunch of telcos. There weren't any vendors involved at all. I think that telcos finally recognized that between them and their vendors, they had headed in a direction which was ultimately going to leave them in a very precarious position relative to the web scale players who are beginning to nibble away at their revenue base. Mm-hmm. And so they had to seize control of the situation, and that's essentially what NFV is all about. So yeah, we see it totally as a network operator driven movement. Many vendors are being dragged kicking and screaming because it just has huge impacts. I mean, not only does it undermine the value of a lot of the development they've done over many years. It fundamentally changes the business model and the way they engage with network operators. It changes the whole value chain. It changes the whole vendor ecosystem. It changes the relationship between telcos and their vendors in some really fundamental ways. So we live in exciting times. Yeah, that's a good point. It does seem like it is interesting because it does, for those vendors out there, it is a whole new world for those guys, something that they're not quite ready for, it seems like in some cases. And so it is a bit challenging. But again, I know, at least from the operator's point of view, it does seem like they have a certain comfort level with those vendors. And so it does seem like they want to have those vendors involved just because of their legacy comfort level with them. So obviously they want to bring them along with this. I know a lot of it is working towards open source as a platform and things like that as well. I guess how important is it to kind of have everybody on the same page, and is open source a good way to do that? And does it seem like, I guess, the industry in general, are they moving at a good enough pace, at a good enough clip, and on the same page to make this virtualization future a reality in our lifetimes? So let me address the question about the sort of the way that telcos are now viewing their vendors, and this whole question of do you still have a single vendor that you rely on to do everything, or do you kind of break it apart and start looking for best of breed and bringing in disruptive players? Mm-hmm. One of the dynamics we've seen is that telcos do see this as an opportunity to bring new kinds of vendors into the mix, and we're very often seen in this role as a disruptor. Someone that really understands the software world, that can move quickly and nimbly, and that hasn't got anything to lose by pushing forward completely new kinds of solutions here. We're not cannibalizing mm-hmm. massive existing revenues with tier one operators from equipment sales. We've always been a software vendor. So, but then, there's obviously more risk associated with that in their minds because, they are, the telcos themselves are going to have to take responsibility for aspects of system integration. Now, actually, what we're beginning to find is that, as they see these solutions being brought up in the lab, and they realize that, actually, well-written software, you can bring it up real fast and you can onboard it to orchestration real easily. And, these small vendors work together really effectively. And, actually these interoperability issues that, that they imagine will be huge problems are really just go away quite quickly. Mm-hmm. So the network operators who are prepared to experiment in this area, I think I've been very pleasantly surprised by how quickly and easily some of these things can come together. Now, you asked about open source, and that's a really, really interesting dynamic, and again, potentially will change things a lot. I think there are some misconceptions about open source. I mean, one of them is, open source is free, and therefore, it's just going to radically reduce our cost base. Well, sorry, but software isn't free. If you want to stand up a production network and use open source software as the basis of that, but absolutely going to need a vendor to stand behind that and support it and enhance it and look after it, and potentially wrap around it quite a significant amount of commercial software, because the open source solution doesn't necessarily do everything you need it to do. Mm-hmm. So it isn't free, but it does have the potential to greatly reduce development timescales and cost. We're looking very closely at various open source building blocks as the basis of very quickly developing solutions for networking problems, where we may still have to add quite a bit of additional software, but it gives us a massive leg up in compared with starting from scratch. By getting there more quickly and doing so more cheaply, we can be even more disruptive from the point of view of delivering very cost-effective solutions and delivering them very quickly.
Yeah, it does seem like you're right. Open source does provide kind of that base layer of support that then the vendors and the operators can then build upon. And it almost seems like that's almost necessary, because there needs to be, it seems like a buffer between the continuous evolution and updating of open source and operators who need to have, at some point in the existence, some sort of standard that they can actually go and deploy with. So it almost seems like having some sort of vendor partner buffer there to kind of be that go-between to say, hey, okay, here's a nice setup that you guys can now go with and deploy and be comfortable with. I know open source is still continuously evolving, but here's something you guys can at least move with. It seems like that's an important part of the whole process as well. There are some other dynamics around open source as well. One of which is the sense that if you go with something that's fundamentally based on open source, there's less risk of vendor lock-in. Yeah. Because there's almost certainly somebody else you can come in, to bring in. If it goes completely pear-shaped, you can bring somebody else in to another distro, or if it's OpenStack or something, or somebody who can pick that code base up and run with it. So I think that's a good thing. But this whole question of standards and evolution and all the rest of it. I mean, again, people get very wrapped around the axle, I think, around standards and interoperability and those kinds of things. When you look at the web scale world, those guys don't worry about those kinds of things. They just get on and get the job done. And too much standardization gets in the way of progress. Sure. That's a lesson that telcos are still learning. Yeah, I mean, yes, it's critically important for certain handoff points. For mobile handsets to the core network, of course, you've got to have a really good specification for that. Yeah. But if you standardize too much inside the core of the network, then A, it takes too long to get that job done, and B, you tend to sort of damp down the possibility of innovation. It actually slows things. It just slows everything down. Yeah, but there's also, operators do have to worry a little bit about the regulatory environment. They do have certain issues that they have to deal with that could, in general, perhaps be, issues that they have to, work through. I mean, that's always something that the web scale guys perhaps don't have to deal with as much. I mean, when it comes to piece apps and location-based services, 911 and things like that, there are things that do
Sure.
tend to kind of pile up on those guys.
Yeah, I mean, telcos, mobile operators, they're obviously hemmed in by a whole bunch of things that the web scale guys don't have to deal with. I'm just saying, look at the web scale world, look at how they operate, and borrow whatever practices you possibly can, because it's just phenomenal how quickly that world has been able to stand up incredibly scalable, incredibly fault tolerant systems that are running at tiny fractions of the cost of operating a traditional telco network.
Yeah, great point. And obviously, too, I guess from your point of view, the scalability and the reliability aspects, kind of like we were saying earlier, those are areas that operators shouldn't have any concerns about at this point. I mean, obviously, a lot of these operators have hundreds of millions of customers or connections out there. The scalability aspect of these platforms, do you think are robust enough to handle what operators need?
Well, I mean, you look at the classic example I always give is WhatsApp. I mean, there was a company which, with only $8 million worth of funding, achieved a 200 million subscriber base, and with a service that was incredibly reliable and fault tolerant. I mean, when was the last time WhatsApp went down? And they've since grown that to over 1 billion.
Yeah.
And they never had more than about 30 or 35 developers on that.
It's amazing.
Absolutely. So, I mean, while there are all sorts of reasons why, a telco could never get to that level of productivity and efficiency, nevertheless, it's worth holding that up as an example of what's possible if you're starting with a completely clean sheet of paper. And, and that is the kind of thing that telcos should aspire to. And yes, there's all sorts of limitations and restrictions, but there is this really stretch goal out there, if you like, to try and become as much like that kind of web scale operation as possible. Yeah,
you got to have those goals out there to kind of keep them working. And it even seems like the operators who are going down that road rather aggressively, and that's kind of what they're trying to do, is just have that milepost or signpost out there and say, hey, that's what we want to aim for. That's what we're focused on. And it gives everybody kind of a focus to move in that direction. So that's an important part of it as well. Definitely. So I guess as you look ahead a little bit, I mean, what are some of the bigger challenges you see, maybe from a technology point of view, in terms of continuing this evolution? I mean, I know you mentioned earlier orchestration is a big part of this as well. I know orchestration is always kind of a bit of a tricky situation for getting everybody on the same plane on everything. I guess what's your general view of, maybe from a technology point of view, of getting, maybe some of the challenges out there that kind of need to be surmounted for the telecom space?
There certainly do seem to be a lot of challenges around orchestration at the moment. That seems to be a highly topical subject, and there appears to be a lot of friction there. I mean, our view of that is really there's two things going on. One is there's a tendency on the part of network operators to over-engineer the orchestration piece of it. I mean, we all agree that reducing operational costs and operations automation is a big part of the business case for network virtualization. But you can go overboard. If you put hundreds of engineers on the job, they're going to come up with incredibly complex solutions, and that's definitely a dynamic that we see happening. The other thing that's happening is that the virtualized network function world is still in a very early phase. So most of the virtualized network functions that people are trying to deploy are just lightly adapted ports of software that used to run on a proprietary hardware box. Mm-hmm. And with all of the sort of typical software practices that are associated with a hardware platform. Mm-hmm. When you try and bring that software into a cloud environment, it creates all sorts of problems, because the way that you have to configure the thing, the way that you interact with the software, through a command line interface, having to configure a whole bunch of fixed IP addresses on individual pieces of software. These are all things that are perfectly acceptable in a hardware world where you bring up a box and then it lives in the network for 5 years. But you absolutely can't have that in a cloud environment where you bring up a virtual machine and it might only be there for 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. You have to automate the heck out of that. If you write software designed for the cloud, you tend to pay attention to those kinds of things. If you're porting software from an appliance, you just don't understand how to do that. So what's happening? You've got this horrible problem of, on the one hand, over-engineered orchestration. On the other hand, pieces of software that are just fundamentally resistant to the whole idea of automation. And you try and bring them together, and it creates a massive amount of friction. So what we've seen is, we go into labs with our cloud native stuff, which was designed with this whole notion of you just bring it up in the cloud. Very few dependencies between the software components. You can bring them up in any order. Very little configuration you need to inject in the first place. And within a day, we can get onboarded to a typical orchestration system. And that compares with months for many other kind of more traditional VNFs. So it is absolutely possible to address this friction, but it does require a lot of action on the part of vendors to make their software well suited to orchestration. So there's the investments that need to be made there.
Does it seem like the vendor community is working well together on these fronts? Because, like you said earlier, obviously there are some of the more established guys who have maybe a little resistance to this sort of change. And there's always a lot of organizations that are trying to help. There's the Linux Foundation and OpenFE and various ones that are trying to kind of be the mediator, in between all that. But I guess as you view, the relationships, is it a pretty cohesive, interactive group, or is there still a lot of kind of that resistance there?
Well, I think the world is divided into two camps. And the two camps are, traditional network equipment vendors who are trying to push a vision of, we'll take care of the whole thing. We'll build your infrastructure, we'll provide you the orchestration, we'll provide you the hardware, the middleware, and all the VNFs, and everybody will be happy. Yeah. And then on the other hand, there is the whole new world of, the independent hardware vendors, the vendors of x86 hardware, and network switches and so on, the software infrastructure players, the Red Hats of this world, the Canonicals, all those kinds of people, the new generation of orchestration platforms, HPE, NEC Netcracker, those kinds of people, and then independent software vendors like ourselves who are providing the VNFs, and even the chip vendors, people like Intel, making huge contribution here behind the scenes to try and move all this thing forward. So we all work together very, very happily in among that ecosystem because we're all complementary to one another, if you like, and we all have much to gain from the success of NFV. And the old world, I think, pays lip service to, well, our platforms are open. We'll provide you with infrastructure, but sure, you can bring third-party software on it. But is there an ecosystem that allows that to happen? No, not really.
Yeah, well, I guess that's where the operators have to come in and kind of say, "Hey, guys, let's break down these walls and make this work at some point." Because at the end of the day, I think we all see. I think everybody realizes where this is going. I think it's already happening. It's starting to move already. It's just a matter of kind of making those big decisions, those big business case altering decisions that need to happen at some point, and it's just a matter of when those decisions, I guess, are made.
Right, but it takes a lot of willpower and a lot of investment on the part of the operators to keep forcing the issue with their vendors and keep pushing them down that path of openness and interoperability and just staying with the mission.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I know with the operators too, like you said earlier, but just kind of make sure everybody in the organizations are on board as well. I know there's a lot of training involved and trying to get the employees even on board with this new way of looking at things. There's resistance internally that they have to work through as well. So yeah, it's a big process for everybody involved.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Definitely. Hey, Martin, obviously appreciate the great insight on this. Obviously, you guys are working pretty hard in this space, and again, kind of getting some insight from you guys on what's happening behind the scenes is always great for myself and also for our viewers. So definitely appreciate the time and insight on the topic today, and hopefully we'll touch base again soon on the topic and kind of get an update on what's happening with both Metaswitch and also just the industry in general. So thanks again for the time today.
Great.
Well, thanks for watching this week's show, and make sure to check out our next NFV SDN Reality Check when we speak with Ariaka on the growing SDN WAN space. Thanks for watching.
NFV SDN Reality Check with Dan Meyer is a production of RCR TV. To suggest show topics or to reach Dan, you can find him on email, dmeyer@rcrwireless.com, and on Twitter @Meyer_Dan. For more Dan, news on NFV SDN and everything wireless, find your way over to rcrwireless.com.